Hello and welcome back to another episode of jPlay. I'm Marcus and today I will be reviewing this awesome game Russian Railroads. In this 2 to 4 player game, the players represent railroad tycoons in the former Soviet Union and they try to earn the most victory points in order to be the winner. You earn these victory points by different means. For once, you can build your railroads. In this game, there are 3 railroads available which you are about to build. For once, there's this Trans-Siberian Express, there's the railroad from Moscow to St. Petersburg and the railroad from Moscow to Kiev. Another way to score you some victory points is to build out the industry in the Soviet Republic. For once you have this counter here that will show you how many victory points you will score each round, and you will also notice that there is basically the line is disconnected here, and you can connect this line by building out the industry, and you do this with these nice little placeholder tokens here for the industry. And another cool thing about these industry tokens is that on the back side they also serve as actual train tokens, and you will need them in order to bring your railroads from start to finish. So for example from Moscow to St. Petersburg. You can also score victory points with these special end of game scoring cards, which will be dealt to any player in a hidden fashion, so no one really knows what additional victory points might be waiting for the other players. Of course, you get to know your own card, of course. And this card, for example, gives you 6 victory points by the end of the game for each engineer you hired, whereas this card would give you 7 victory points for each of these question mark tokens that you can earn throughout the game. It's also possible that you gain additional end of game scoring cards throughout this game, but this is really something you have to go for and earn it. This would be the main game board before the actual setup, and it has to be mentioned that this game scales perfectly between the 2 to 4 players. For example, this side would represent the game for 3 to 4 players, whereas on the back side of this awesome map there are basically a special setup for a 2-player game only. So you see some of these fields here are not available in a 2-player game, and this really makes a perfect balance for a 2-player game. This is a starting game board for a 4-player game. Each of the players starts with 5 workers, and the black tracks here start at the fields with a number 1. And each player starts the game with this nice little train, if you want to call it. I think the correct term would be draisine. And this first train shows the reach basically, or how far it can go. And this is represented by this white number to the right here. So this draisine would be allowed to move only 1 space on this Trans-Siberian Express. The industry marker starts at field number 0, and all the other tokens and wooden pieces are more or less prepared as you might need them in a later stage of the game. So you have the other rails here, you have these question mark tokens that give you some very powerful bonus actions or possibilities for the game. You have some additional scoring tiles that you can use for your rails, and you also have the possibility to place a second industry stone. Yes, you heard that right. So basically it's possible that you can score your industry twice throughout the game. This can be very nice. Let's head over to the main game board, and as I mentioned, this is the site for the 3 or 4 player game. We are now going to set up the 4 player game here, and you see this is the player order which we have to define in any second now. Additionally, all player starts with 0 victory points, and we also have to prepare the engineers for this round. And in a 4-player game you play with 7 engineers that are available in this game. So we have an engineer here on this side, which you can basically hire for 1 gold here. And there are also 2 additional engineers, which you cannot hire in this round, but you can place your workers on them in order to gain their special bonus. For example, this engineer will let you move the gray track 1 space ahead, and you would also gain immediately 5 victory points. The engineers to the left here are only placed on the board in order to make you aware that these guys will be available at later turns. You can do your planning accordingly. Player order is determined at random, so each player will be given 1 of these cards. So the player who gets this card will be the first player, so we will put his special meeple on the appropriate spot on the game board. Additionally, you can check the backside of these cards, so the first player doesn't gain anything. The second player already gains 2 victory points. The third player, gains 3 victory points, and you already guessed it, yes, the fourth player gains 4 victory points at the start of the game already. As the designer prepared tokens like this that shows you, yes, you can have more than 400 victory points by the end of the game, you can imagine that these special bonus at the start of the game is not really tremendous. So it's really only a little bonus in order to satisfy you because you're not going first. The last player can now choose one of these 4 special bonus cards that he also gains because he's not going first. And you see, these cards are only given to the player who are not first. So first player really doesn't gain any bonus here at the start of the game. And there are cards like this one, so you get already double tokens that you can place on your railroad. You can move your industry 1 space ahead, for example. You gain an additional gold coins. Gold coins are really good in this game, so you definitely need them. And you can also already move 1 black track 1 space ahead. This doesn't seem to be very powerful, but especially at the start of the game, it allows you to move to the second field here, and this second field already unlocks you the gray rails, which will actually score you some victory points after each round. So what can you do in this game? I already explained to you there are many ways to score you some victory points. One of them is here on the left, and this will more or less allow you to expand your actual railway. So there are fields that will expand your black, gray, brown, light brown and the white tracks accordingly. On the right side of the game board there are some additional fields where you can actually place your workers. So for example, these fields give you new trains or new industry tiles. Here you can move your industry token ahead accordingly. You get some bonus tiles, so these double tokens. This field is especially important because this will give you some gold, and you need this gold in order to hire the engineers down here. When you go to this field, you get some additional workers for this round. And on these fields, which I already explained to you, you can either use these 2 engineers here, or you can hire the engineer that's there on the right side of the game board. More or less all of the fields that are on this game board can be used by only 1 player at one single time. So even if there is a field that shows 2 workers, this doesn't mean that 2 players can use it. No, that's not the case. This only means that you have to unlock this action with 2 workers. So whenever a field is already occupied, you cannot place an additional worker of any kind to this one. There are some, let's say, special rules or special cards in this game that will allow you to do so, but that's not really something that's happened too often. To every rule there is an exception, and this exception is printed down here. So this field allows you to place any number of workers on this field whenever you are going to need it. So for example, blue wants to use this field because everything else is already occupied. Then the next turn yellow could go there, and then the turn afterwards green could go there, and then maybe blue again. So this field is really open for everyone. Okay, what happens when I place a worker on one of these fields? Let's consider I want to build out my black rails here. So blue wants to set a worker to this field here, and this field shows you, okay, you can move 2 black rails 1 space ahead. What you can do now is to move this black track, for example, 1-2 spaces ahead, or this track only 1 space ahead, and then this track 1 space ahead, and all the combinations you might be able to think of. There are some limitations to this one. So for example, you have to look for the order, and the order is already printed here on this little field there. So for example, we have the order here, so black, gray, brown, light brown, and this white big track here, and this is really a big track, and you only have 1 of those, and you really always have to keep the order. So you are never allowed, for example, to overtake the track that's of a lower value. So gray could never be on the same spot as the black track, or even overtake it on itself. And the same would go, for example, if in later stage you would also have the brown tracks, then the brown track could never go on the same spot as the gray track, even on the black track, or even more or less overtake it as well. I already explained that there are some special fields on your player board here, and these are activated under several and different conditions. So this is very easy. So whenever you reach this field here with a black track, you are be able to unlock the gray track. This field you would get an additional worker if you would manage to have the brown token at least on this spot here, and you would be able to reach it with an appropriate train, so at least a train that can reach field number 3. And as already mentioned, there are fields for all the colors of this track. Of course, you can only use these fields whenever you already unlock the appropriate colors. And whenever you unlock these colors, so for example, the crate rails, then you would prepare them and would place them close to each of the tracks, so you unlock all 3 of them for all the tracks, so for the Trans-Siberian, for the St. Petersburg and the Kiev line here. Then now, as soon as they are prepared, you're also allowed to move them, for example by placing a blue worker on this field here as well. These fields here are also very important, as they will allow you to actually get some better trains or to build out your industry in the Soviet Republic. So these 2 fields are more or less the same, but the first one will go there, can use it for only 1 worker. The second player has to use 2 workers, and when whoever goes to this field down here gets basically both though a train and an industry, whereas these fields above give you either or, so you can decide to go for a train or for an additional industry. There are trains with a range from 2 to 9 basically. For each player there is normally 1 train available at the start of the turn, but of course they are not reserved for the players. So for example, 1 player could go for all of these 4, for example. When you want to buy a train, you always have to take the train with the lowest number that is currently available, and the same would also apply for the industry. So when you go for this action that I just showed you, then you can have to go in this case for a train with a reach of number 2, and then you can decide if you want to use it as an actual train in order to replace it or to extend the train, or you can flip it to the back side and use the industry side of that. When you want to use the token for the train side, then you can choose to which railroad you would place this additional train. Normally, all these rails can only hold 1 train. There's an exception for the Trans-Siberian line, which you see by this little plus symbol here. This line is allowed to have 2 trains, and basically the reach will be summed up. So in this case, for example, this line would have the reach of 3 spaces, but you can also place it down here, for example, and you would prepare it like here. So you would now have the first train on your Moscow to St. Petersburg line, and the same would go for the Moscow to Kiev line. In a later turn, you can also replace your train. So for example, if you then in a later stage go for this mighty train here, you could say, okay, I want to extend my Trans-Siberian line, so I will put the new powerful train here. So my Trans-Siberian Express is now, or can now reach 7 fields, and then you can start building out your Moscow to St. Petersburg line. This can really lead to a chain reaction basically. So if you would have one below here, you could also exchange it, and only after you cannot really replace it, you will send back the train with the lowest value back to the reserve, and then it can still be purchased at least for its industry side. So would give this back to the general reserve, and then any player who's going for this special train action can now choose if you want to use or buy this train here or want to use any available industry tile that's available. If you want to use the tile you just acquired for your industry tile, then you would place it to your next available spot at the bottom of your player board. I think I already showed that to you at the introduction of this game. So this will now allow you to reach or go past this field with a value of number 5 to value number 10. There is also a special bonus that each of these industry tiles have. So whenever you reach this field with your industry marker or move past this field, then you can unlock the special power that's printed on this industry tile only once during the whole game basically. So in this case you could again go for an additional train, or you could also buy an additional industry token. So in this case this could be really useful to go for the next industry token in order to place it here. So let me just show that to you. So you could directly prepare the move to the victory point field with a value 15. These fields are some special actions that you can take throughout the game. For example, this one lets you build a double token next to your Trans-Siberian line. This one gives you 2 gold coins, and this is more or less the only way how to get back some of your gold coins. And down there you can hire these loan workers, which you can use in this game round. And then you have these changing special action fields that will change throughout the game depending on which engineer is currently available. And last but not least, you can also hire this engineer here. So any player would pay a coin here, then he would be allowed to take this engineer, which you would place beside your player board, and this engineer is now for you and you alone. So no other player can use the special power of this engineer here. So whenever you would place a worker on this engineer in a later stage of the game, this would allow you to move a black track and a gray track 1 space ahead. And we just uncovered another great way to score some victory points. So the player with a majority of engineers by the end of the game gets 40 victory points, the player with second most engineers gets 20 victory points, and all the other players don't get anything. Whenever you run out of workers in the game round but you still want to go for an additional action, you can go for any available gold coin as a replacement for a worker. So you can place it here and then you can use this space here as you would have used a normal worker. But it's not allowed to be vice versa. So whenever a space tells you to use a worker and a gold coin, you can do that. So for example, you could go in this direction. You could also go in this direction because gold coin can replace a worker here, but what you cannot do is you cannot do it like this. And one of the very last thing, you can also place your worker in order to make sure that you will go first. In a 4-player game, you are not allowed to place your worker under your current position. So blue would not be allowed to place this worker here. He could only place the worker basically there. And then, for example, the green player could go on this space here. So in the next round, he would more or less make sure that he will go first. But there is more. After all players have taken their actions and basically passed, so the end of one game round, these two workers can be still reused. So we would start with a new first player, so green would take his worker and he could place it to any field that's still available that only shows you one worker. So you would be not allowed to pay an additional coin, for example, to go for this action. So this action really asks you to use fields that only require one worker. And that's the main reason why this space is in play, because this will really guarantee you that you can place your last worker anywhere where it actually makes some sense. After all players have passed, it's time to score some victory points. First of all, each of the players gains victory points for the amount of their industry. So in this case, blue would gain 5 victory points for his industry. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And then you score your actual railways. You already noticed that you don't get any victory points for the black rails. It really starts off with a great rail here, and you see the most victory points you get for the big white railways here. There are also additional ways to store you some victory points at this point of the game. For example, at the Kiev line here, if you would make it to this field, so you have a black rail here and you can reach it with a train, basically that's depicted on this icon here. So you have a train that reaches here, we have a black rail that's on this one here, so you would also gain these bonus points and these will sum up. So in this case this would be 3, 5, 6 additional victory points for blue. Let's do some demo scoring. I already explained to you that you gain 1 victory point for each gray rail that's on your player board, and you would always assume that these blanks here are also filled with virtual gray rails, and you would count all the fields that go to the next occupied field here. So in this case you would have 1, 2, 3 spaces for the gray rail, so you would gain 1, 2, 3 victory points for gray. Then you would do the same for the brown rail in this case, and each brown rail gives you 2 victory points. So there are 2 fields or 2 spaces available for brown, so this would mean these are 2 and 4 victory points. And this could go on. So for example, in the later end of game round scoring, this would be the situation, though in this case you would gain 2 victory points for gray, then 2, 4, 6 additional points for brown, and this light brown here gives you 4 victory points each, so this would be a total of 8 additional victory points here. Okay, and what are these double tokens all about? So just consider we used our worker in an earlier stage of the game to get ourselves one of these double tokens here. Then we would directly be allowed to place one of these double tokens on the farthest left side of your Trans-Siberian Railroad. So for example, on this space like here. If you would gain an additional double token in a later stage of the game, we would just put it beside the already existing double tokens here. And what do these do? I think that's pretty obvious. So normally these would bring you 4 victory points each. Now this rail would give you 8 victory points instead, and the same would apply for this space here as well. But this really counts for all the colors in the space. So, and you can really imagine if this full line is more or less stacked with these double tokens, you really get a tremendous amount of victory points. When all the players have done their scoring, we do some cleanup, so all the workers return to their owners. We would move the engineers accordingly, so now this engineer would be available for hire. This nice lady would move to the right. Now we would have the first B token available with an additional special power, and all the other engineers move accordingly. And here you would already see, hey, you still got 6 rounds left to go. This is basically the core mechanic of this game, but there is so much more, of course. For once, there are these special powers, these question mark tokens. So whenever you reach these fields and you can more or less satisfy the requirement here, so in this case you have to move your black rail at least to this space and you have to reach it with one of your trains, so like here, then you would be able to choose one of your 7 special question mark tiles. There are 7 different available. They're all the same for all the players, so everyone has the same set of these question mark tokens, but they can only be used once by each player for his own. For example, the blue player could now decide to use this special power here, and this would let you move your industry marker 5 spaces ahead. So in this example, the blue player would go from 3 victory points each round to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 victory points each scoring round, and he would also be able to activate both of these special powers, like here getting a new train or here getting a special bonus for your engineers and directly score the amount of victory points. You can also score additional victory points whenever you make it to the end of this railroad. So whenever you have won your black rail basically on the last spot of your railway, you get 10 victory points for St. Petersburg and Kiev. And the same would apply for the Trans-Siberian Express, and this Trans-Siberian Express would give you the opportunity to bring the big white rail on the game board and would let you move it automatically 2 spaces ahead, and this can really bring you some serious victory points, especially when you unlocked this scoring tile over here. So this is also a possibility which you get from these question mark tiles here, so this would give you this additional scoring points. So now, as from now on, each of these brown tracks gives you 3 victory points, the light brown 6 victory points, and the white even 10 victory points instead of 2, 4, and 7. And this can also be really a game changer. Then there are also these 5 special cards which you can acquire, also be more or less available to you by the usage of this special action token. So for once you can go for an additional end game victory card, or you can go for one of these special action cards. So you get another train with a reach of number 9. Here you get an additional black worker until the end of the game. So this is very powerful. Here you get a special engineer and other stuff like that. And that's basically it, what I wanted to show you about Russian Railroads. It's really an awesome game. I absolutely love and adore it. It seems to be, when you read through the rules, hey man, this is so complicated, this takes ages, but it does not. Once you play it once, it's really clear to you, you know what you have to do. The good thing about this game is you can really change your strategy from game to game. So in one game you will focus on the industry, whereas on the other game you really want to finish your Trans-Siberia Express to get the white rails on your player board and such. So there are really huge amount of possibilities to score you some victory points. So this is really a no-brainer if you're into Euro-style games and you're looking into a game that's for once complex but not so complex that you really have a long downtime in this game. Then really Russian Railroads is for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you soon in one of my next videos. I think my next video will be a full playthrough again, so please stay tuned. Please check out my Facebook page for any announcements, and until then, bye bye.